In this lesson, we're going to learn how to pre-compose layers together and some of the benefits of this workflow. Okay, so in our last lesson, we talked about how to create a composition using a file from our project panel and then adding that composition to our main composition. But what happens if we already have the layers that we want to put into that composition on our timeline? We're not starting over here in the project panel. Well, the answer to that is pre-composing. And pre-composing is awesome. It's one of my very favorite things about After Effects. And if you learn how to do it the right way and stay organized, you'll have a leg up on everyone else who's not using pre-composing as a part of their workflow. So let's talk about how to pre-compose some layers together. Well, something that we've already created that is going to be perfect for this example is the background. So we created that light, and then we also created this pale yellow solid, and those are working together to create an image that we're viewing as our background. So there's no reason we can't pre-compose those layers together so that we have one composition when we want to refer to our background. So to select the two layers that you want to add to your pre-composition, since these are not right together, I'm going to hold Control and click that second layer there so that I have light one and the pale yellow solid in a selection together. And it's important when you're pre-composing that you already have all the layers selected that you want to add to that pre-composition. Now what we do is we go up to Layer and then come all the way back down to Pre-compose. And that's going to pop open the pre-compose dialog box. And there's a couple of options that we have here. The first one is the new composition's name. And since these are the layers creating our background, I'm just going to name this background. And then we don't have the option to choose the leave all attributes in main composition, and that's just because we are pre-composing two layers together. So I have to choose the move all attributes into the new composition, and you can check on if you want the composition to automatically open, but I'm not going to do that yet because I just want to show you how to get to that composition without it opening automatically. So go ahead and say OK. And we see that those two layers that were on the timeline here at the bottom disappeared, and now we just have the background composition, and we see that we have that little composition icon next to it. Now in our last lesson we learned that if we want to go inside of a composition, we just double click that layer. So I'm going to double click that, and we see that now our light and our pale yellow solid have been stored inside of that pre-composed layer. So now if we wanted to change anything or add anything inside of this composition, we could do that. And now on our main composition, we only have to see this one layer on our timeline. So very helpful for staying organized and really just keeping this main composition list of layers low so it's easy to find what you're looking for quickly. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about is another part or aspect of this organization that we have to keep up with when we're pre-composing. Now, if I pre-composed lots of layers on this timeline and had many of those next to each other, they default to this sand color that you see here. So it's kind of easy to get a little bit lost, and you may not remember exactly where that layer is, and then you have to go through here and read the name of that layer, and you may not have named it as descriptively as you would have hoped, and it can become really difficult really quickly to find the layer that you're looking for. So just another element of that added organization is changing that default tag color. So if I look at this tag that I have up here on the columns, I can drill down through here to these labels, and you see that there's this little thumbnail of color that corresponds with the layer color that is in the bar over here on the timeline. So if I click that, it's going to give me a menu of lots of different colors that I can choose. Now you want to be careful when you're choosing these other colors, because some of these colors you already are going to automatically associate with certain kinds of layers. So if I change this to red, for example, I'm going to see that and think that's a text layer, because text layers always default to red. So you want to choose a color that you don't often see in your projects. So this dark green color here, or fuchsia or pink, are going to be colors that you won't see quite as often. So let's choose this dark green color, and that's going to be the new color for our background on our timeline, and just set it apart a little bit more from the rest of our layers. Now, there's no limit to how many layers you can pre-compose together. So earlier we only pre-composed 2 layers together, and now I want to go ahead and do this with 3 layers. So if I move forward in time here, there's no reason that I can't pre-compose my banner, my count up, and my teal circle together. So I'm going to shift select all 3 of these layers, and instead of going through the menu at the top, I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut. So to pre-compose with the keyboard shortcut, you're going to hold down Control, hold down Shift, and then add C to that. And that's going to bring up that pre-compose dialog box, just the same as if we would have gone through the menu at the top. And once this becomes a part of your workflow where you're pre-composing all the time, you're going to want to get familiar with that keyboard shortcut. So I'm going to name this pre-compose layer as kind of just a label that's going to tell me what's inside of that comp. So I have my banner, my counting layer, and my circle. So I'm just going to put the first 3 letters of circle, so CIR, and then we'll do an underscore, and then my numbers are the next thing. So I'll just put in the first 3 letters of that. So num, and then another underscore, and we'll just put ban for banner. So if you are aware of the things that are going inside of that pre-composition, it's helpful sometimes to abbreviate so that you're not typing out a really long label that you're not going to be able to see as a layer name once this is kind of scrunched down here. So you really don't want to have more than 4 words as something on that layer name. So go ahead and say OK to that. And now those layers have been pre-composed together, but our animation doesn't look any different. And if I want to go inside of that composition, I can do that by double clicking it. And now if I wanted to change anything, any of those keyframes that I created, I can do that in here as well. Now, something interesting that we have going on now is we have a nested comp. So what that means is if we go out to our main composition, we have our main composition, and then we have our num ban composition, and then inside of that composition we have our banner composition. So 3 compositions together counts as a set of nested comps. So that is going to be a big part of the pre-compose workflow that you would encounter, and it's really just using compositions to group layers together to build up your main scene. And it's just really a great workflow for staying organized and keeping that main list of layers down on your main composition level. Okay, so let's go back out to our main composition, and I'm going to grab that dreams.ai file from the project panel and drag that onto my timeline. Now, what if I want to pre-compose 1 layer at a time? Why would I do that, and what does that mean? Well, the reason that I would do that is sometimes I pre-compose a layer by itself for the purpose of being able to add more things to it later as a group. Or other times I may want to add an effect that can't be applied directly to my layer without first pre-composing it. Now that gets a little bit tricky, and in later lessons we're going to talk about that phenomenon and the times when you're going to look out for that and when you would need to do it. So first though, I'm going to go ahead and spin this dreams fulfilled layer that we've created here, and then we'll pre-compose it by itself and talk about some of the options that we have when you're pre-composing 1 layer at a time. So I'm just going to move back all the way to the beginning of my timeline, and we'll bring up the rotation option. Now earlier I talked about bringing up just the position by hitting the P key. You can do the same thing for the rotation property simply by hitting the R key. So now we have the rotation opened up right there, and I'm going to click that rotation stopwatch and then move forward to about the 1 second mark. And let's have this spin, let's say about 5 times. So come in right here to where you see the 0 times and just type in a 5. Now, what's great about doing this rotation property is that I'm able to put in the number of times I want it to spin, or if I want it to spin maybe 5.5 times, then I get to change those degrees. So if I wanted it to spin around 5.5 times, I would just type in a 5 and then a 180 right there, because 180 degrees would be half, and then I have that available to me. So that is just an interesting function of that rotation property. Now let's go ahead and just watch this through, see what it looks like. And I can go ahead and turn on motion blur for that layer just so that I can see how much blur it's getting from how many frames I've given this to create that animation. And it has a pretty interesting look to it. I like the way that it's getting kind of blurry, but the middle part of it still looks pretty stark against that background. So this is going to be something interesting that will add to our composition later on. And the way that I'm going to do that is by pre-composing this layer. So now we can kind of see what that spin looks like by watching that RAM preview back. Okay, so let's go ahead and pre-compose this one layer by itself. So I'll select the layer and we'll hit Control-Shift-C to bring up that pre-compose menu. And you see that now we do have the option to leave the attributes in our main composition, or we can choose that second option for the move all attributes into the new composition. So let's talk about the difference here and what's going to happen. Because we were only selecting one layer to create this pre-comp, I have really just the option to choose what happens to these keyframes that we've created. If I go ahead and say leave all attributes in the main composition, what will happen is my layer itself will go inside of that pre-composed layer just like we've been talking, and then my keyframes will stay on the outside. So my keyframes will be applied to the composition, not the layer. Now, if I choose the move all attributes into the new composition, my layer along with the keyframes applied to that layer will go inside of that main composition, and the main composition itself will not have any keyframes on it. So that's what I want to do in this case. So I'll go ahead and say OK to that. And you can see that if I drop this down, there are no keyframes on my main composition. They've been stored inside of my pre-comp on its individual layer. So this is useful because I know that I want to create this animation with this spinning look for my dreams fulfilled piece of text, but I don't want to use it right now. So I'm going to actually delete this composition. So select the composition, hit delete, and now I don't have it anymore. But it's only not here on my timeline. It is actually being stored in my project panel. So if I come over here to the place where we named this, it's going to be right there highlighted for me. We see that we have the Dreams Comp 1 composition. And now I can use this anytime I want, simply by grabbing it from the project panel and dragging it on to my main composition or any other composition that I would want to nest it inside of. Now, the reason why I ended up choosing the move all attributes is because now my keyframes were stored inside of that comp and I didn't lose them. If I would have chosen the other option, my keyframes would have been on the outside of the comp, and when I deleted it, those keyframes would have been lost. So if you're wanting to save those keyframes, you want to make sure that they go to the inside of your composition. So that's just a little thing to keep in mind when you're trying to decide which option to use, the leave all attributes or move all attributes options. Okay, so again, I'm still not ready for this comp yet, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that from my timeline. So in this lesson, we learned how to pre-compose layers together and how we can use this method to stay organized.